I never thought I'd be the guy telling a story like this. Never thought I'd be sitting here talking about dying. But here I am. I figure if my experience helps even one person out there make sense of their own life, or what might come after it, then it's worth the discomfort of reliving it all. My name is Michael Winters. I served with the 3rd Infantry Division during Operation Iraqi Freedom. This was back in 2007 during what they called the Surge, when we pushed thousands more troops into Iraq to try to stabilize things. I was a staff sergeant then, on my 2nd tour. The first had been relatively quiet. This one wasn't. Before I get into what happened that day in Ramadi, I should probably tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. My dad was military, career Army, so I guess you could say it was in the blood. We moved around a lot when I was a kid, but I always knew I'd follow in his footsteps. There was never really a question about it. After high school, I enlisted. This was pre-September 11th, and my mom had hoped I might go to college first, but I was eager to get out there. Basic training was exactly what I expected. Challenging, but not impossible. I was in good shape and had the right mindset going in. I wasn't one of those guys who broke down when the drill sergeants got in my face. In fact, I think I thrived on the structure, the discipline. It made sense to me in a way that regular civilian life never quite did. I specialized in infantry operations. My first few years in the Army were relatively peaceful. Some deployments to Korea, Germany, but nothing that put me in the line of fire. Then September 11th happened and everything changed. Suddenly, the training took on a whole new meaning. This wasn't theoretical anymore. We were going to war. My first tour in Iraq was in 2004. It was tense, don't get me wrong, but my unit was lucky. We lost one guy to an IED, but otherwise we made it through okay. I came home feeling, I don't know, maybe a little invincible. That's not the right word. I wasn't cocky or anything, but I'd been to the sandbox and made it back. I'd done my part. I got married to my girlfriend Jenny between tours. We'd been together since before I enlisted, and she'd waited for me during that first deployment. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. We talked about starting a family, but decided to wait until I was done with my military service. Funny how life works out sometimes. When I got orders for a 2nd tour in 2007, Jenny took it hard. Things in Iraq had deteriorated, and the news was full of reports about American casualties. But this was my job, my duty. I couldn't shirk it, no matter how much a part of me wanted to stay home with her. I remember the night before I left. We didn't sleep, just held each other, talking about everything and nothing. Plans for the future, the house we were going to buy, the kids we were going to have. All the while, there was this unspoken fear hanging between us that maybe none of that would happen. I told her not to worry, that I'd be fine, that I'd come home to her. I believed it too. The deployment started routinely enough. Our unit was stationed at a forward operating base outside Ramadi. If you don't know, Ramadi was a hotspot, one of the most dangerous places in Iraq at the time. The insurgency was strong there, and they didn't much care for us trying to establish stability in their backyard. Our daily routine varied, but generally involved patrols through the city, meetings with local officials or tribal leaders, training Iraqi security forces, all the usual counterinsurgency stuff. Some days were quiet, others, not so much. I led a squad of 10 men. Good guys, all of them. There was Martinez, my second in command, a tough Mexican-American kid from East LA with a wicked sense of humor. Peterson, our radio man, who was always reading these thick fantasy novels whenever we had downtime. Williams, the youngest of the group at just 19, who had a new photo of his girlfriend to show us every week. Johnson, an ex-college football player who could carry more gear than seemed humanly possible. And then there was Cooper. Cooper was different. Quiet guy, kept to himself mostly. But there was something about him that drew people in. He had this calmness about him, even when shit was hitting the fan. I remember one time we were taking fire from a building across the street. Everyone's adrenaline pumping, and I look over to see Cooper methodically returning fire, his breathing steady like he was at the range back home. When I asked him later how he stayed so calm, he just shrugged and said, "When it's your time, it's your time. No sense getting worked up about it." Those words would come back to me later in a way I could never have imagined. We'd been in country about 4 months when things started to intensify. More IEDs, more sniper attacks, more intelligence about insurgent activity in our area. Our commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, called me into his office one evening in late July. "Winters," he said, "we've got intel about a high-value target in the Al Tamim district. Apparently, he's coordinating a lot of the attacks we've been seeing. We're putting together a raid, and I want your squad on point." I nodded, taking the folder he handed me. Inside was a grainy photo of a middle-aged Iraqi man, along with coordinates and other intelligence details. "We move tomorrow at 0500, Reynolds continued. "Get your men ready. This could be a big one." I spent that night briefing my squad, going over the raid plan again and again. The target was a 3-story building in a densely packed neighborhood. Our intelligence suggested the HVT would be there with minimal security. Just a few guards. In and out, that was the plan. Of course, plans rarely survive contact with the enemy, as they say. That night, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I wrote a letter to Jenny. Not that I had some premonition or anything. I'd written plenty of letters during my deployment, but this one felt different. I found myself telling her things I normally wouldn't put in writing. How much I loved her. How meeting her had changed my life. How I couldn't wait to start our family together. Reading between the lines, I was saying goodbye, just in case. I sealed the letter and gave it to Peterson, asking him to make sure it got sent if anything happened to me. He gave me a strange look, but agreed. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I lay on my cot, thinking about home, about Jenny, about the life waiting for me if I made it through this tour. Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went outside. The night was clear, stars brilliantly visible in a way you never see in cities back home. The air was still hot, even at that hour. I lit a cigarette, a habit I'd picked up during my first tour and hadn't been able to shake. Cooper found me there staring up at the stars. "Can't sleep, Sarge?" he asked, sitting down beside me. I shook my head. "Just thinking. About tomorrow? About home?" He nodded knowingly. "You think about it differently over here, don't you?" "Home, I mean. It's like, over here, everything's sharper. More real somehow." "Yeah," I agreed. And at the same time, home feels like a dream. Something I made up. We sat in silence for a while, sharing the quiet of the night. "You believe in anything, Sarge?" Cooper suddenly asked. "You know, like God or heaven or whatever?" The question caught me off guard. We didn't usually talk about this kind of stuff. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "My mom took me to church when I was a kid, but I haven't thought about it much since." "Why? You worried about tomorrow?" Cooper shook his head. "Not worried exactly. Just thinking. My grandma was really religious. Used to tell me that death isn't the end, just a doorway to somewhere else. I've been wondering about that lately." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. We sat there a while longer, then went back to try to get some sleep before the mission. Morning came too quickly. We geared up in the pre-dawn darkness, checking and rechecking our equipment. The mood was tense but focused. Everyone understood the importance of the mission. "All right, listen up," I said, gathering my squad around me. "This is a straightforward raid. We go in, secure the HVT, and get out. Rules of engagement still apply. We're not here to harm civilians. Keep your heads on a swivel and watch each other's backs. Any questions?" There weren't any. We'd done this kind of operation before. Everyone knew their role. We moved out at exactly 0500, a convoy of Humvees making its way through the still dark streets of Ramadi. The city was quiet at that hour, but not deserted. Early risers were already out, setting up market stalls or heading to morning prayers. They watched our convoy pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. As we approached the Al Tamim district, I felt that familiar tightening in my gut. The pre-mission jitters that never quite went away, no matter how many operations you'd been on. We dismounted about 2 blocks from the target building and proceeded on foot, moving in the practiced formation we'd drilled countless times. The neighborhood was a maze of narrow streets and closely packed buildings. Perfect for ambushes, which was why we moved carefully, checking corners and rooftops as we advanced. So far, everything was going according to plan. We reached the target building just as the first ray of sunlight crested the horizon. It was a nondescript structure, 3 stories of tan concrete with a flat roof. Nothing to distinguish it from the dozens of similar buildings around it, except that our intelligence said our HVT was inside. I signaled the team to take positions. Martinez and 3 others would secure the perimeter. The rest of us would enter the building, me first, followed by Cooper, then Williams, Johnson, and Peterson bringing up the rear. We stacked up at the door, adrenaline pumping. I held up my fist, counting down with my fingers. 3, 2, 1. Johnson breached the door with a ram, and we flowed in, weapons up, moving with the practiced precision of a well-trained unit. The first floor was clear, just a small common area and kitchen, empty of people. We moved quickly to the stairs, ascending to the second floor. That's when everything went sideways. As we reached the top of the stairs, there was a burst of gunfire from one of the rooms. Williams went down immediately, hit in the shoulder. Cooper and I returned fire, driving the shooter back into the room. Johnson dragged Williams to cover while Peterson called in that we had contact. "Williams, you good?" I shouted over the continued gunfire. "I'm hit, Sarge, but I'll live." He grunted, his face pale but determined. I nodded, then turned to Cooper. "Cover me. I'm going to clear that room." Cooper nodded, laying down suppressive fire while I moved forward. I tossed a flashbang into the room, waited for the bang, then entered, sweeping my weapon across the space. There were 2 insurgents inside, one already down from our return fire, the other disoriented from the flashbang. I quickly subdued him, zip-tying his hands behind his back. "Room clear," I called out. 1 KIA, 1 detained. We continued our sweep of the second floor, finding it otherwise empty. Our intel had said the HVT would be here, but so far there was no sign of him. "Maybe he's on the 3rd floor," Cooper suggested. I nodded, signaling for Johnson to stay with Williams while the rest of us continued upward. As we approached the stairs to the 3rd floor, I had a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread. Something wasn't right. The building was too quiet. Where were the other guards that were supposed to be protecting the HVT? "Hold up," I whispered, raising my fist. The team stopped. "Something's not right." I keyed my radio. "Martinez, any movement outside?" "Negative, Sarge," came the reply. "Street's clear." Wait, there was a pause. "I've got movement on the rooftops across the street. Armed individuals, at least 3 of them." My blood ran cold. "Fall back," I ordered. "Everyone, we're pulling out." This feels like I never finished the sentence. The world exploded around us as multiple shots rang out from somewhere above. I felt something slam into my chest like being hit with a sledgehammer. I was thrown backward, landing hard on the floor. For a moment, there was only confusion. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I heard shouting, more gunfire, but it all seemed distant, unimportant. I looked down and saw blood spreading across my chest plate. My first thought was oddly detached. That's not good. Cooper was suddenly kneeling beside me, his face tight with worry. Sarge, stay with me." I tried to speak, but no words came out. Just a gurgling sound that scared me more than the blood. Cooper was yelling into his radio now, calling for a medic, for extraction. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I wasn't afraid, but I couldn't form the words. The pain hit then, white-hot and all-consuming. I'd been shot before, a grazing wound during my first tour, but this was different. This was deep, vital. I could feel my life pouring out of me with each heartbeat. Cooper was applying pressure to the wound, saying something I couldn't quite make out. The edges of my vision were growing dark. I thought about Jenny, about the letter I'd written. At least I'd said what needed to be said. Then suddenly Cooper looked up, his expression changing from concern to alarm. He reached for his weapon, shouting something. There was another shot, loud and close. Cooper jerked backward, a red mist spraying from his neck. He collapsed beside me, his eyes wide with surprise. I wanted to reach for him, to help him, but my body wouldn't respond to my commands. More shouting, more gunfire, the sound of boots on stairs. Our guys? The enemy? I couldn't tell anymore, and honestly, it was starting to matter less and less. The darkness was closing in, the pain receding. In its place came a strange calm. I thought about what Cooper had said the night before, about death being a doorway. As my vision tunneled and the sounds around me faded, I wondered if I was about to find out if he was right. My last conscious thought was of Jenny's face, smiling at me on our wedding day. Then everything went black. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. The darkness that engulfed me wasn't like falling asleep. It was absolute, complete. There was no sense of time passing, no dreams, no thoughts. Just nothingness. Then there was something. At first it was just a sensation, a feeling of movement, like being carried by a current. I had no body that I could perceive, no limbs to move, no eyes to see. And yet I was aware, conscious without a form. The darkness began to recede, or maybe I began to perceive something beyond it. There was light distant at first, then growing closer, or I was moving toward it. The light wasn't blinding, despite its intensity. It was inviting, warm. As I approached, or as it approached me, I became aware of a presence. No, multiple presences. Entities, souls. I didn't have words for what I was experiencing, but I wasn't alone in whatever this place was. I felt no fear. Fear seemed to belong to another existence entirely. Here there was only a profound sense of peace, of rightness. The burdens I'd carried in life, the responsibility, the worry, the pain, all of it was gone, lifted away. Then I heard, Well, heard isn't quite right. I perceived a voice, though not with ears. It was both around me and within me, male and female and neither, familiar and yet completely unknown. Michael, it said. Just my name, but infused with such love, such complete acceptance, that it overwhelmed me. If I'd had tears to cry, I would have wept. The light intensified, and within it, I began to make out a figure, or the suggestion of a figure. It was radiant, powerful, and emanated a love so pure and complete that I felt bathed in it, embraced by it. This was the presence, the overwhelming presence that had called my name. Words failed to describe what happened next. It was like being known, completely, utterly known, down to the core of your being. Every thought I'd ever had, every action, every fear and hope and dream, all laid bare and accepted. Not judged, though I judged myself harshly enough, seeing my life from this new perspective. Just accepted. Loved despite and because of everything. The presence communicated with me, though not in words exactly. It was more like pure understanding, flowing from it to me. I was shown everything. My life from beginning to end, but not as a linear progression. All at once, every moment existing simultaneously. I saw connections I'd never noticed. The impact of seemingly insignificant choices, the ripple effects of both my kindnesses and my failings. I saw Cooper as a child, playing in a backyard while his grandmother watched from a porch. I saw Williams reuniting with his girlfriend, her face streaked with tears. I saw Jenny, my Jenny, growing old, surrounded by children who weren't ours. That should have hurt, but it didn't. Nothing hurt here. I understood it all, accepted it all, in a way that would have been impossible in life. Time didn't exist in this place, so I don't know how long I remained there, basking in the presence of that loving light. It could have been moments or centuries, but at some point, I became aware of a choice being presented to me. I could stay, move further into the light, be embraced fully by the presence and whatever lay beyond, or I could return. Return to what? To pain, to difficulty, to the messiness of human existence? Why would anyone choose that after experiencing the peace and love of this place? And yet I felt a pull, a sense that there was something unfinished, something I still needed to do. The presence didn't push me one way or another. The choice was mine, freely given. As I considered, I became aware of other presences around me, souls I somehow recognized, though they had no physical form. My grandfather, who had died when I was 12, a friend from high school who had been killed in a car accident, and Cooper, but I shouldn't have been surprised to find him there. It's not what you think, Cooper's presence seemed to say, though again, not in words. Death is not the end. It's barely even real. But life is precious exactly because it's brief, because it's difficult, because you can't see the whole pattern while you're in the middle of it. I understood then that returning would be the harder choice. Staying would be bliss, completion, eternal peace. But returning would mean pain, confusion, the limited perspective of human existence, and yet it would also mean opportunity, the chance to share what I'd learned, to be a light in a different way. The presence that had first welcomed me, the overwhelming, loving entity at the center of the light, seemed to expand, enveloping me in what I can only describe as a cosmic embrace. I felt its approval, its love, no matter which choice I made. But before I could decide, before I could form the thought that would determine my path, something shifted. The light began to recede, or I began to be pulled away from it. There was no sense of rejection or abandonment, just a gentle but irresistible tug in the opposite direction. I tried to resist, to move back toward the light, the presence, the peace, but the pull grew stronger. The last thing I perceived was the voice again, saying words that would echo in my consciousness long after. Remember. Remember and tell them, this is not all there is. Then the darkness returned, but different this time, heavy, confining. There was pain, incredible pain. Sounds began to filter in. Beeping machines, urgent voices, the hum of what I would later learn was a medical helicopter. I gasped, a ragged inhalation that felt like fire in my chest. My eyes flew open to blinding light, not the warm, inviting light of before, but harsh clinical illumination. Faces hovered above me, masks covering mouths, eyes focused and intense. He's back, someone shouted. We've got him back! But had they? Part of me, the essential part, I was still there, with the presence in the light. The rest of me was being dragged back into a broken body, into pain and confusion, and the limited perspective of human existence. As I faded into unconsciousness again, the normal unconsciousness of the heavily medicated, I clung to one thought, one directive that seemed branded onto my soul. Remember and tell them, this is not all there is. I woke up 3 days later in a military hospital in Germany. The first sensation I was aware of was pain, dull, throbbing, but somehow distant, like it belonged to someone else. The second was the feeling of something in my throat, a breathing tube, I would later learn. I tried to move but couldn't. My body felt impossibly heavy, disconnected from my will. There was a nurse checking one of the many machines surrounding my bed. When she noticed my open eyes, her own widened. "Doctor," she called out, pressing a button somewhere out of my field of vision. "He's awake." What followed was a blur of activity. Doctors examining me, removing the breathing tube, an experience I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Asking me questions I couldn't answer because my throat was raw and my mind was still caught somewhere between here and there. It was another day before I was coherent enough to understand what had happened to me. A doctor, Major Reynolds, a military surgeon with kind eyes and a perpetually furrowed brow, sat beside my bed and explained, "Staff Sergeant Winters, you were hit by a sniper's bullet. It entered just above your chest plate and damaged your right lung and several major blood vessels. You lost a catastrophic amount of blood." He paused, his expression grave. "You were clinically dead for approximately 4 minutes and 17 seconds before the medics were able to restore your heartbeat. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. That's how long I'd been gone. It had felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. Your squad managed to fight their way out and get you to the extraction point. You were airlifted to the field hospital at Camp Ramadi, stabilized, then transferred here." Major Reynolds checked something on my chart. "Frankly, Staff Sergeant, the fact that you're alive at all is something of a miracle. There were several times during surgery when we thought we were going to lose you again." I wanted to tell him that I had been somewhere else during those 4 minutes and 17 seconds, that I had experienced something profound, something life-changing. But my throat was still too raw, and I wasn't sure I had the words anyway. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I woke up. "My squad?" My voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible. Major Reynolds' expression tightened slightly. "3 casualties, including you. Private First Class Williams survived his wounds. He's recovering in another ward. Specialist Cooper ... He hesitated. "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant. Specialist Cooper didn't make it." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of grief wash over me. Cooper, the quiet philosopher of our unit. The man who'd talked about death being a doorway just the night before he walked through it. I'd seen him there, in that other place. Had that been real, or just my brain constructing a comforting fantasy as it shut down? "The third?" I managed to ask. "Private Johnson. He was hit while helping to carry you out." Another wave of grief, sharper this time. Johnson, the former football player, the gentle giant of our squad, had died saving me. "I need to rest," I whispered, not wanting the doctor to see the tears forming in my eyes. Major Reynolds nodded, standing up. "Of course. Press this button if you need anything." He indicated a call button near my hand. "Someone will check on you soon." After he left, I lay there, tears streaming silently down my face. Not just for Cooper and Johnson, though their loss cut deep. I was crying for all of it. For the beauty and peace I'd experienced in death, and for being pulled back into a world of pain and loss. For the knowledge I now carried, too profound for words, too overwhelming to process. Remember and tell them, this is not all there is. The words echoed in my mind, a mandate from beyond. But how could I possibly communicate what I'd experienced? How could I put into ordinary language something so far beyond the ordinary? The next few days passed in a fog of pain medication, physical assessments, and brief visits from military personnel looking to debrief me about the mission. I told them what I could remember about the raid, which wasn't much beyond the point where everything went wrong. I didn't tell them about what happened after I died. I wasn't ready for that conversation, wasn't sure I ever would be. Williams came to see me once he was mobile. He was in a wheelchair, his left arm in a sling, his face still pale but his eyes clear. "Sarge," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They told me you flatlined, that you were gone." I nodded slightly. For a while, he wheeled closer to my bed. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me. If I hadn't been hit first, if I hadn't slowed us down." "Stop," I said as forcefully as my weakened state would allow. "This wasn't your fault, Williams. We walked into a trap. Plain and simple. Cooper and Johnson made the same choice any of us would have. We leave no one behind. You know that. Williams nodded, but I could see the guilt eating at him. He would carry that weight for a long time, maybe forever. I wished I could share with him what I'd seen, what I now knew. That death wasn't the terrible finality we all feared. But I couldn't find the words, and I wasn't sure he was ready to hear them anyway. A week after I woke up, I was stable enough to be transferred to Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. The flight was uncomfortable, my damaged body protesting every bit of turbulence, but I was past the worst of the physical danger. Now it was just a long road of recovery ahead. Jenny was waiting for me when I arrived. The moment I saw her face, anxious, relieved, trying so hard to be strong, something broke inside me. I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel anything since waking up in Germany. Now the emotional dam burst. She rushed to my side as they wheeled me in, carefully embracing me, mindful of my injuries. I held on to her with my one working arm like she was a lifeline, sobbing into her shoulder. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, her tears falling onto my hospital gown. "They called me. They told me you were gone. And then they called back and said you were alive, and I didn't know what to believe." "I'm here," I said, though a part of me wondered if that was entirely true. "I'm here now." The next few weeks were a blur of surgeries, physical therapy, and medical evaluations. The bullet had done extensive damage, and while the German doctors had saved my life, there was still a lot of repair work to be done. I had chest tubes for my damaged lung, transfusions to replace the blood I'd lost, surgeries to repair torn vessels and remove bullet fragments. Through it all, Jenny was my constant. She took leave from her job as a kindergarten teacher, rented a small apartment near the hospital, and spent nearly every waking hour at my side. She helped me eat when I was too weak to hold a fork, read to me when the pain medication made my vision too blurry to read myself, and talked to me about normal, everyday things when the memories of Iraq became too vivid. But I hadn't told her about my experience yet. I wasn't sure how. We'd never been particularly religious people. Spiritual maybe, in a vague, unexamined way. How could I tell her I'd died and encountered someone beyond description? That I'd been given a message I still didn't fully understand? About a month into my recovery, she caught me staring out the window of my hospital room, lost in thought. She'd been telling me about her conversation with our landlord back home, but I hadn't heard a word. "Michael?" She touched my arm gently. "Where are you right now?" I turned to look at her. Really look at her. She'd lost weight since I'd been injured. Dark circles under her eyes, testament to the stress she'd been under. But she was still beautiful to me. Maybe more so now that I'd seen her from the other side. Seen the golden thread of her life intertwined with others. With mine. "I need to tell you something," I said quietly. "And I need you to just listen all the way through. It's going to sound crazy. It might be crazy, but it happened. At least I experienced it happening." She sat down in the chair beside my bed, her expression concerned but open. "Okay," so I told her. All of it. The darkness after being shot. The light. The presence, or presences, that had welcomed me. The overwhelming love I had felt. The life review. Seeing Cooper there. The choice that had been taken from me when I was pulled back. As I spoke, I watched her face carefully, looking for signs of disbelief or worry. But she just listened, her eyes never leaving mine, occasionally nodding or squeezing my hand. When I finished, there was a long silence. I waited, my heart pounding. "Do you think I'm crazy?" I finally asked when I couldn't stand the silence anymore. She shook her head slowly. "No, I don't know what happened to you, Michael, but I don't think you're crazy." She took a deep breath. "When they called me, the first call, when they said you had died, I felt something. It was like a warmth wrapping around me. In the middle of the worst news of my life, I felt this strange peace, just for a moment. Then it was gone and the phone rang again, and they told me you were alive." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never told anyone that. It seemed too strange, too. I don't know. You felt it," I whispered, reaching for her hand. "The presence. It touched you too, somehow." She nodded, wiping away tears. "Maybe. I don't know. But I believe that you experienced what you experienced. And it changed you. I can see it in your eyes." She was right. I was changed, though I was still discovering all the ways. The experience had left me with a profound sense of peace about death itself. Not that I was eager to die again. The pain of my injuries was reminder enough that living in a physical body had its own value. But the terror, the great unknown of death, no longer haunted me. What did haunt me were the words, the message, remember. Remember and tell them. This is not all there is. Tell who? Tell them what exactly? That death isn't the end? That seemed too simple, too obvious a message to require a journey to the afterlife and back. As my physical recovery progressed, these questions occupied more and more of my thoughts. The doctors were pleased with my healing, though they made it clear I would never return to active duty. The damage to my lung was too severe. I would always have reduced capacity there. And there were other, subtler injuries. Nerve damage that left my right hand with diminished sensation. Scars that pulled and ached when the weather changed. 5 months after being wounded, I was medically discharged from the Army. Staff Sergeant Michael Winters, honorably discharged, Purple Heart recipient, no longer fit for service. It was a strange feeling. The military had been my identity for so long, and now that was gone. I was a civilian again, but a civilian with no clear direction. Jenny and I moved back to our small house in Pennsylvania. She returned to teaching, while I drifted. There was disability pay, enough that I didn't need to work immediately. I spent a lot of time sitting on our back porch, staring at the trees, trying to make sense of what had happened to me. The nightmares started about a month after we got home. Not the typical PTSD nightmares that many veterans experience, though I had those too sometimes. These were different. In these dreams, I was back in that place of light, but something was wrong. The presence was trying to tell me something, show me something, but I couldn't understand. I would wake up gasping, covered in sweat, the words echoing in my mind, remember. Remember and tell them. Jenny suggested I talk to someone professional about my experience. Not because she thought I was crazy, she assured me, but because I seemed stuck, unable to move forward. There are people who study near-death experiences, she said one evening as we sat on the porch. Doctors, scientists, researchers, maybe talking to someone who's heard stories like yours would help. I was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. She found a doctor, Elizabeth Kenner, a neuropsychiatrist who had written extensively about NDEs, as they were apparently called. She was based in Philadelphia, about an hour's drive from our home. Doctor, Kenner wasn't what I expected. I'd imagined someone clinical, scientific, maybe a bit skeptical. Instead, she was warm, deeply interested, and completely non-judgmental when I haltingly shared my experience. What you've described is actually quite consistent with many near-death experiences, she said after I'd finished my story. The dark tunnel, the light, the presence or beings of light, the life review, these are common elements. Though each person's experience is unique, of course. So you're saying it's normal? I asked. She smiled slightly. I wouldn't use the word normal for something so extraordinary, but it's a documented phenomenon, yes. I've interviewed over 100 people who have had NDEs, and while the details vary, there are striking similarities. Do you think it's real? Or just my brain shutting down, creating hallucinations? Doctor. Gunter. Kenner leaned back in her chair, considering. That's the big question, isn't it? From a strict neurological perspective, there are theories about what might cause these experiences. Oxygen deprivation, the release of endorphins, the brain's way of coping with trauma. She paused. Those explanations don't fully account for everything that NDE survivors report. The verified out-of-body observations, for instance, the life changes that follow, and the consistency of the experiences across cultures, religions, ages. So you believe it's real? I pressed. I believe your experience was real to you. And I believe it has meaning, profound meaning, whether it was a glimpse of an actual afterlife or a construction of your consciousness. She leaned forward. What matters more is what you do with it now. I rubbed my face, frustrated. That's just it. I don't know what to do with it. I was given a message. Remember and tell them. But I don't know what it means. Tell who? Tell them what? Doctor. Kenner nodded thoughtfully. Many NDE survivors feel they've been given a mission or message. It's actually quite common, and often the meaning becomes clearer over time. I don't have time, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. There's an urgency to this. Like I was sent back specifically to deliver this message. And I'm failing because I can't figure out what it is. She studied me for a long moment. Michael, have you considered that perhaps the message isn't something to be figured out intellectually, but something to be lived? That maybe telling them is about how you live your life now, how you embody what you've learned? I left Dr. Kenner's office with more questions than answers, but also with a strange sense of permission. Permission to take what had happened to me seriously, to treat it not as a hallucination or a dream, but as something real and meaningful. I continued seeing her every couple of weeks. And slowly, I began to work through not just the NDE, but also the trauma of the ambush, the loss of Cooper and Johnson, the end of my military career. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt crushing, but there were also moments of clarity, of connection to that same peace I'd felt in the presence of the light. About 6 months after my discharge, I received a letter. It was from Cooper's grandmother, the one he'd mentioned that night before the raid. She'd gotten my address from the military somehow and wanted to talk to me about her grandson. Would I be willing to meet with her? I was hesitant at first. What could I tell this woman about her grandson's death? The official report would have covered the basics, but something pushed me to say yes. Maybe it was the memory of Cooper's presence in that other place, the sense that he had been there. Mrs. Cooper, Edith, lived in a small town in Ohio. Jenny and I made the drive on a crisp autumn day, the trees blazing with color along the highways. Edith's house was a modest bungalow with a well-tended garden and a porch swing that creaked gently in the breeze. She was in her 80s, white-haired and frail-looking, but her blue eyes, so like Cooper's, were sharp and clear. She invited us in, served us tea and homemade cookies, showed us pictures of Cooper as a boy. He wrote about you in his letters. She told me, said you were a good leader, that he trusted you. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. He was a good soldier. A good man. She nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. He was, but that's not why I asked you to come. She set down her teacup with a slightly shaking hand. David, that was his first name, called me the night before he died. That wasn't unusual. He called when he could. But this call was different. He told me he'd had a dream about his grandfather, my Harold, who passed 20 years ago. Said Grandpa Harold told him it was almost time to come home, but not to worry about me, that I'd be okay. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. When I got the news about David, I wasn't surprised. Heartbroken, yes, but not surprised. She reached for my hand suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. You were there when he died, weren't you? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Did he suffer? The question was direct, her eyes unflinching. I thought about the shot that had taken Cooper's life. Quick, probably mercifully so. No, I said honestly. It was very fast. She nodded, seeming satisfied. But I knew there was more. I could feel it building in me. The need to tell her what I'd seen. Mrs. Cooper, Edith, there's something else, I said, my voice low. Something I haven't told many people. I was shot too in that same fight. I died for a few minutes. And while I was gone, I saw Cooper. Jenny reached for my other hand, squeezing it supportively. Edith just watched me, her expression unreadable. He was there in this place of light. I can't describe it adequately, but it was peaceful. Beautiful. And Cooper was there. He seemed at home, at peace. I took a deep breath. I don't know if that brings you any comfort or if it just sounds crazy to you, but it's not crazy, she interrupted. Not to me. I've believed all my life that death isn't the end, that those we love never really leave us. A tear slipped down her wrinkled cheek. Thank you for telling me that, for having the courage to share it. We stayed for another hour, talking about Cooper, about my recovery, about my struggle to understand the message I'd been given. When we were leaving, Edith took my hands in hers once more. You're still here for a reason, Michael, she said. David isn't, but you are. Don't waste that gift trying to understand it. Just live it. The drive home was quiet, both Jenny and I lost in our own thoughts. But something had shifted for me. Something Edith had said, or maybe just the experience of connecting with her, of sharing a small part of my experience and having it received with such simple acceptance, had loosened something inside me. That night, I dreamed of the light again. But this time there was no frustration, no sense of failing to understand, just the warm, encompassing presence and a profound sense of peace. When I woke, the words were still with me. Remember and tell them. This is not all there is, but they no longer felt like a burden. They felt like a gift. The next morning, I sat at our kitchen table with a notebook and pen while Jenny was still asleep. I began to write, not just about the NDE, but about all of it. About enlisting, about my first tour, about meeting Cooper and the others, about the raid and what went wrong, and yes, about what I experienced in those 4 minutes and 17 seconds when my heart stopped beating. I wrote without censoring myself, without worrying about how it would sound or who would read it. I just let the words flow. It felt right. It felt like remembering, like telling. When Jenny came downstairs and found me still writing, pages and pages spread across the table, She didn't ask what I was doing. She just made coffee, kissed the top of my head, and left me to it. I wrote all day, barely stopping to eat. And the next day, and the next, the words poured out of me like they'd been waiting, building up pressure until they could finally be released. When I finally finished nearly a week later, I had over 200 handwritten pages. It wasn't a book, not really. It was too raw, too unstructured for that. But it was my story, my truth, as best as I could capture it. What now? Jenny asked when I finally emerged from my writing fugue. I shook my head. I don't know. It just felt important to get it all down. She looked at the stack of pages. May I read it? I nodded. Of course. She took her time, reading a little each day over the next week. Sometimes she'd ask me questions, or we'd talk about a particular memory or reflection. When she finished, she set the last page down carefully. This needs to be shared, Michael, she said simply. Not just for you, for others who might need to hear it. I wasn't sure about that. The thought of strangers reading my innermost thoughts, my most profound experience, was intimidating. But the words echoed again in my mind. Remember and tell them. Maybe this was the telling. With Jenny's encouragement, I began to research how one might go about publishing such a narrative. But traditional publishing seemed like a long shot. I wasn't a writer, and my story, while profound to me, might not be commercially viable. Then Jenny suggested something simpler. What about starting a blog? Just put it out there, see if it resonates with anyone. So that's what I did. I created a simple website, titled it 4 minutes and 17 seconds, and began posting my story in chapters. I didn't promote it or tell anyone besides Jenny about it. I just put it out into the world and waited. For the first few weeks, there was nothing. No comments, no indications that anyone was reading. I tried not to be discouraged. The telling itself had been cathartic, necessary. If no one ever read it, that would be okay. Then one day there was a comment. I had a similar experience after cardiac arrest 3 years ago. I've never told anyone because I thought they'd think I was crazy. Thank you for having the courage to share your story. And then another. My son was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. Your words about the peace you felt, about the presence, it gives me hope that he's okay wherever he is. And another, I'm a hospice nurse. What you've described matches what many of my patients report seeing or feeling in their final moments. Please keep sharing. The comments multiplied. People began to share the blog with others. Within a few months, I was receiving dozens of emails a day, from veterans, from families who had lost loved ones, from people who had their own NDEs, from those who were simply curious or seeking comfort. I started responding to these messages, engaging with the people who reached out, and in doing so, I found something I hadn't realized I was missing. Purpose, connection, a way to serve that didn't involve carrying a weapon. A year after starting the blog, I was contacted by a veteran support group in Pittsburgh. They'd been sharing my writing among their members and wanted to know if I would come speak to their group. The thought terrified me. Writing was one thing, speaking in front of people quite another, but I agreed. The meeting was held in the basement of a community center. About 30 veterans were there, men and women of different ages, from different conflicts. Some visibly disabled, others carrying wounds less visible. I stood at the front of the room, hands trembling slightly, and told my story. All of it, the raid, the shooting, the death, the light, the return. I watched their faces as I spoke, saw skepticism turn to interest, to engagement, occasionally to tears. When I finished, there was a silence. Then an older man in the back, who I would later learn was a Vietnam veteran, raised his hand. I had something similar happen in '68, he said, his voice gruff. Never told a soul. Figured they'd either think I was nuts or trying to avoid another tour. He cleared his throat. Thank you for having the guts to talk about it. Others shared their own stories then. Not all NDEs, but experiences of transcendence, of connection, of moments when the veil between worlds seemed thin. The meeting ran long into the night. People who had been strangers hours before embracing as they left, exchanging contact information, promising to stay in touch. That night, driving home with Jenny, I felt something settle into place, a certainty that had been building since that first dream of the light. I know what the message means now, I said quietly, or at least I know what it means for me. Jenny glanced at me, a small smile on her lips. Tell me. It's about connection, about reminding people that what we see, what we experience in our daily lives, the pain, the struggle, the divisions, that's not all there is. There's something beyond, something that connects us all. I searched for the right words. The presence I felt, the overwhelming love, It wasn't just for me. It's for everyone, and most people don't get to experience it directly, at least not until the end. So those of us who have glimpsed it, we need to bring that back. We need to live it, to embody it. She reached over and squeezed my hand. That sounds like a worthy mission. And it was, still is. In the years since, I've spoken to hundreds of groups, veterans organizations, grief support groups, spiritual seekers, medical conferences. I've written a book, a more polished, complete version of that initial outpouring. I've connected with researchers like Dr. Kenner who study NDEs, lending my experience to their work. I've also connected with other NDE survivors, learning that while our experiences share common elements, each is unique, personal. Some saw religious figures, others deceased loved ones. Some were given specific insights or knowledge. Others simply bathed in unconditional love. But almost all came back changed, with a new perspective on life and death, on what matters and what doesn't. Not everyone believes me, of course. There are skeptics, debunkers, those who insist that what I and others experienced was nothing more than a dying brain's final fantasy. I don't argue with them anymore. The certainty I feel doesn't require external validation. And besides, as I often tell those who come to hear me speak, belief isn't the point. The point is how we live now, how we treat each other, how we remember or forget that there's more to existence than what we can see and touch. Jenny and I did eventually have children, twin boys now 10 years old. We named one David after Cooper. The other we named Johnson, honoring both men who died that day in Ramadi. The boys know their namesakes' stories, and they know mine. Not all the details. They're too young still for the full weight of it, but enough to understand that their father died once and came back with a purpose. Sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, one of them will ask me what it was like, where I went when I died. I do my best to explain, to translate the inexplicable into words a child can grasp. They listen wide-eyed, accepting in the way that children can be before the world teaches them to doubt. Were you scared? They often ask. Not there, I always answer. There was no room for fear in that place. And they nod, satisfied for now, though I know the questions will get more complex as they grow. I still have physical reminders of that day. The scars, the reduced lung capacity, the occasional pain when the weather changes. But they've faded in importance over the years, becoming just another part of me, like the gray in my hair or the lines around my eyes. The spiritual impact, though, has only deepened with time. There are still nights when I dream of the light, of the presence that welcomed me with such love. I wake from these dreams not with the desperate gasping of my earlier nightmares, but with a sense of having been reminded of something essential, something I'm in constant danger of forgetting in the daily rush of living. Remember, the presence told me, remember and tell them. And so I do in whatever ways I can. I tell this story, my story, not because it's exceptional, but because in its essence, it's universal. We are all more than we appear to be. We are all connected in ways we can barely comprehend. And death, that great fear that drives so much of human behavior, is not the end. It's barely even real, as Cooper put it. This is not all there is. That's the message I came back with, the truth I try to live now. In how I treat strangers, in how I raise my children, in how I face the challenges and joys of each day, in how I think about the future, not just my own, but all of ours, bound together as we are by invisible threads of light. I don't know why I was chosen to have this experience, to carry this message. I was just a soldier doing my job. No more special or deserving than Cooper or Johnson or any of the others who didn't come back. But I was given a gift. The gift of a second chance, yes, but more than that, the gift of perspective. Of knowing bone deep that love is the fundamental reality of existence. That fear and hatred and division are temporary illusions. That death is not the end. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Live as if you know what awaits us all. Live as if you understand how precious and brief this physical existence is, but also how it's just one aspect of a much larger, more beautiful reality. Live as if you can see the light in every person you meet, because it's there, whether they know it or not. Because this pain, this struggle, this confusion, this is not all there is. I promise you that. I died to learn it, and I live to share it. And that, I believe, is exactly what I was sent back to do.